Hello traders, it's Robert Kidman here. I'm going to change how I do my analysis once again as I find how I want to deliver each week. I wanted to bring in more actionable information instead of these long-term outlooks, something that you can bring in your trading for this week. Since you may be new to the indicators, I'm going to start showing you each one, and then we're going to dive in to the analysis. Here's the yearly pivots. Price likes to bounce between the yearly pivots from pivot to pivot. However, you can't just buy and sell at every major pivot. You need a few filters to make sure that the pivots are holding. This is the monthly pivot point. It's just the pivot. It's not the S and the R levels for it. Kind of gives you a bias for the month. If it's above, expect price to stay above it. If it's below, have a bias to be bearish for the month. However, bouncing off of major pivots, you can also use it as a profit target. The weekly pivot gives you a gauge for the week. If price opens above that pivot, you expect price to stay above it, and then if it's below, you expect it to stay below, vice versa. Also, you can use it as areas for price to pull back to, and also look for entries. Going to the yearly pivots, it's good to see where that weekly pivot is, because it may give you an idea of if price is going to continue through the pivot level, or if the pivot jumps up nice and high towards the yearly pivot, price can easily get under it, and it can give you a signal to sell. This indicator here is called, I call it ghost pivots. Ghost pivots show you what the following week's pivot's going to be, and is calculated with price that's already happened, so it's only accurate when you're looking at charts on the weekend, because the new weekly pivot will not print until the new candle starts. And what it's using is the open, high, and low and close for the previous week that's already in place. And as you can see, the purple line shows us where it was on the weekend, and then you can see where the black line shows us where the week's pivot is once the week started. So I'm utilizing these since it is the weekend, the market isn't open, and we can go ahead and see where the new weekly pivot's going to be for the following week. To add to the filters, I'm going to add 2 moving averages. This is an 8 simple moving average, and this is a 20 exponential moving average, the EMA. It's just kind of a gauge for is price flipping above it, or is price starting to hold below it. And it can kind of add to a filter process if you want to stay long or stay short at a certain level. Let's go ahead and dive into this. Right now, the US dollar currency index is at the one of the yearly pivots. This is the R1. It is currently holding. Right now, the weekly pivot is going to open just below. Well, the moving averages are below. As of right now, I would like to see price come back to this weekly pivot and continue higher. If price does get below this weekly pivot, I'll be looking for the pair to start heading lower. However, we still have to get under these moving averages, and we have these highs that are these little tops that are right here just before it. So this will be a difficult move. So for it to get under it, it's not going to happen very quickly. It's going to come under. It's probably going to have to do a pullback and stabilize a little bit before dropping further. Euro dollar. Euro dollar is below this pivot here. It's below both moving averages. The new weekly pivot is going to open just above. Looking for price to do a pullback and then continue heading lower. Dollar Swiss. Dollar Swiss is currently at the actual yearly pivot. We got a nice little pin bar formation on here. This is a great area for it to hold currently. The weekly pivot is below with the moving averages. Look for this area to hold and continue higher. If it does, any pullback to this weekly pivot would be a good entry point. If price does stabilize below this area, look for price to start heading lower. Dollar, Canadian dollar. Price has come close to the this pivot here. Is heading lower. The weekly pivot is just below. Keep looking for the trend to head higher. Next week you'll probably see this pivot shift higher if that is the case, and if this level is going to hold, it will definitely go underneath that level, and then it would get under these moving averages to head lower. But until that happens, stay bullish. Dollar yen. Dollar yen's currently at a 50% retracement between the two pivots. The weekly pivot, price is going to open below that weekly pivot. This area has been tested twice. Look for price to head back lower to the pivot. If price does pull back up and holds above this area, then look for the price to come here to the 115.95 level. Australian dollar, US dollar. Price is swinging at the pivot. The weekly pivot is just above. Look for this area to hold, and then for price to head back lower. If price does get back above it and it starts to hold, look for with the yearly pivot right here, you want to see price break out, come back lower, and then you can look for a buying opportunity for the price to head higher. New Zealand dollar is currently pulling back to the yearly pivot. Got the weekly pivot just above. Look for this area to hold for this week. If price gets above it, look for any pullback to get long. Pound dollar. Currently this correction that we've been in has been making lower highs and lower lows. The weekly pivot's going to be just above with the moving averages. For this week, I'll be looking for price to stabilize around this area and continue down towards the yearly pivot point. Euro pound. Euro pound is currently at one of the pivots. The weekly pivot's going to open just above. Look for pressure to happen and for the pair to head lower. If price does get above this weekly pivot, the monthly pivot is just above. Be careful in this range, as this whole area could continually cause lots of pressure for the pair to get through. If it does break above this level, look for price to head higher. Pound yen. Pound yen is going to open below the weekly pivots, below both moving averages. The monthly is below, and so is the yearly pivot point. Right now you have lots of support in this range right here. For the pair to head lower, you're going to want to look for price to break below and then hold below the monthly pivot. If price does get above the moving averages and the weekly, look for price to head higher. Euro yen, price is below the monthly pivot point. The weekly is going to be just above. Moving averages are above. Look for possible pullbacks into the monthly pivot, then to head lower or back to the weekly pivot. If prices hold, then look for the pair to head lower. Alright, Australian CAD, just above the yearly pivot, and it's above the monthly pivot. The weekly pivot is going to be just below. look for this range to hold and for the pair to head higher. Australia yen, the weekly pivot's going to be just above. Looks like price is pulling back. Look for price to stabilize here and head lower. New Zealand yen is currently at a pivot point. The weekly pivot's just above. If price closes above this weekly pivot and these moving averages, look for price to head higher. Just to go back, just thought of this. New Zealand yen. If price does break below this pivot point, look for a continuation. Alright, Canadian dollar and the yen. Price is currently pulling back to the new weekly pivot. Look for this area to hold and then head lower. If it stabilizes above, look for price to head up towards the monthly pivot. Pound Australian dollar, price is doing a pullback to the weekly pivot and the yearly. Look for this area to hold and head higher. Pound New Zealand, price is going to be pulling back right. It's going to open right at the weekly pivot. Look for this level to currently hold to head higher. If we get a close below this level and below both moving averages, look for the pair to head down to the yearly pivot point. Dollar CNH. Price is currently at the pivot point. It's going to open at the new weekly pivot. Look for this to pressure and break through to head higher. If price does stabilize below, look for price to head to the pivot point. Pound CAD. Price is currently pulling back to the weekly pivot. We're also very close to a yearly pivot. Look for this area to hold and then bring the pair higher. If the pair does break down and stabilize underneath the weekly pivot, look for price to head lower. Okay, that's it. And if you really appreciated this analysis, please let me know. I really enjoy any feedback. And please subscribe. Take care.